one of our alpha meetings, we talked a little bit about business and how does it continue and so on. So I thought it might be interesting to be able to look at the ways that business continues, not only from one meeting to the next, but from one meeting session to another, because sometimes it's longer um, than just from one meeting to the next. So that's where we're going with this today. So before we get any further, we just kind of need to define what's a meeting. And a meeting is an assembly. It's a single official gathering of its members in one room or area to transact business for a length of time during which there is no cessation of proceedings. So some key words there is members in one room or area, transact business, and no cessation of proceedings. And the R1R quote is there. So because now we have so many electronic meetings, we really need to kind of have a definition of electronic meetings. And as you all well know, in the R1R 12th edition, there is a whole section on electronic meetings. All we're going to do is just sort of briefly talk about it. So where some or all members participate through electronic means, such as the internet or telephone. So those are the most common ways of having an electronic meeting. And the interesting thing is that these meetings do not lose the character as a deliberative assembly. So we can assume all of the things that we do when we meet in person. And such meetings, however, have to be properly authorized in its bylaws, is as though all members participating are actually present. This little phrase, authorized in the bylaws, properly authorized in the bylaws, it has been an issue for lots and lots of different organizations. And probably, Al, you can relate to this as far as what all these organizations have had to do because of this. So there's been, I guess, a number of different things that people have ended up having to do. One of the things is to have to ratify a meeting at the next meeting that they will have in person. But do you have anything to add to that, Al, in terms of what's been going on?
Well, the authorship team says that you can't really ratify it, but I'm just here to tell you that a huge number of organizations are either just ignoring this clause altogether under question 107 from parliamentary law, which basically says do what you got to do, or they're ratifying it, and they really don't care what the authorship team says. And I personally don't agree with the authorship team on this. I think you can ratify anything that you can do. So that's my perspective on that. So
okay, thank you. One of the organizations that I belong to, the attorney says that that's the way to go, is to ratify. But you know how parliamentarians and attorneys can disagree on things. But it's interesting, and I think hopefully we will have a lot of this resolved within a year, because most organizations that I'm aware of in some way or another are changing their bylaws so that they can actually have electronic meetings. So the other thing would be a session, and a session of an assembly, unless otherwise defined by the bylaws or governing rules, is a meeting of, it's actually a series of connected meetings devoted to a single order of business, program, agenda, or an announced purpose. Which, when there is more than one meeting, each succeeding meeting is scheduled with a view to continue business at the point where it left off at the previous meeting. So that is different than just having a meeting, and that's why we say meeting session. So what if it's not a session, and what do we do? And if we want to, if we have business and we want to move it from one meeting to another meeting, what can be done? One of the questions that seems to come up on a fairly regular basis in meetings is, what can be done if there's an ongoing meeting but time is running out on an important subject, and we want to be able to discuss that. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. So one of the things we're going to do is to turn to possible motions. And the first thing we're going to do just is to look at the 13 ranking motions and discuss those as we go. What are the motions that people can, that any of you can think of where business would go from one meeting to the next or to another meeting? There are a number of things that can be done. I'm sure you can come up with some ideas based on the 13 ranking motions.
Commit or,
What?
or commit or
Commit, yes. Okay.
Adjourn to another date and time?
Are you talking about an adjourned meeting?
Yes.
Okay, adjourned meeting, yes. Okay.
Postpone, definitely.
Postpone, definitely. Okay, good.
Technically, if it's pending, you could just adjourn.
Yes. Okay, so let's look at these. So one of the things before we go into this a little bit here is the quarterly time interval seems to be coming up because it has to do with the difference in two sessions. So we'll kind of review that a little bit here. So a quarterly time interval between two sessions, if the second session begins at any time during or before the third calendar month after the calendar month in which the first session ends. That's kind of a little hard to understand. So I tried to write this out and took it from R1R. So it could be from like January 1st to April 30th, or from like October 1st to January 31st. It's still confusing. If anybody has a better way of saying what is a quarterly
do.
time interval.
I
Yes.
do, Marilyn.
Yeah,
The way I
please.
teach my high school kids is ignore the month that the meeting occurs in, and then go
Okay.
3 months after it or 3 months before it.
Okay, so say that again. So ignore.
Ignore the month that
month.
the meeting occurs in, and then go 3 months after it or 3 months before it. So if the meeting occurs anytime in January, then you would go February, March, April to the end of that month. And if you were going back, you would ignore January and you go December, November, October to the first of the month.
All right. Yeah, that's a little bit more understandable. Thank you. Okay, so this is just a list of the 13 motions. All right, so we'll talk about commit or refer first. Okay, so in what kind of a committee is the main question to be considered? So when we talk a little bit about to commit or to refer to a committee, so it can certainly be a committee of the whole, which would be, of course, the whole organization, the whole group, where the chair remains as the chair, a quasi committee of the whole, where the group stays together, but there is a new chair during the committee of the whole, and then to be considered informally, which would be a small group where it's informal consideration so that there's no rules as to how long people can talk or how many times they can speak on an issue. So referral can be to a standing committee, but when a standing committee is indicated, then the name of that committee needs to be specified. And a referral can be to a special committee, which could be a select or an ad hoc committee. And this then needs to include the number of committee members that are going to be selected and the method of their selection, or if the method of the selection is not named, then the individual members can be named as members of the committee. Also, instructions to the committee can be included in the motion, but interestingly, if there are specific instructions included in the motion, they are binding on the committee. And it could include things like when to meet, whether to employ an expert consultant, and then the committee can make a decision about what kind of a consultant do they need and what kind of information, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And then also when to report. So if we look at postpone to a certain time, um, action on a pending question can be put off to a definite session, to a definite day, meeting, hour, or even after a certain event. In this case, the motion to postpone makes it a general order. And we'll get back to the order of business and how all these orders and so on fit together. If the maker of the motion or if the assembly would like to make it a special order, then it requires a 2/3 vote to be adopted in order for the postponed motion to be a special order. And again, we're going to see how all this fits into business meeting. There are some limits on postponement. So where no more than a quarterly time interval will elapse between sessions, a question can be postponed until but not beyond the next regular business meeting. And thanks to Al, we have a better definition for quarterly time interval. Where more than a quarterly time interval will elapse between meetings, as for example, in an annual convention, a question can be postponed until but not beyond the next regular business session. So if there's an annual convention, then the last day of the convention, it can be postponed until then, but not after the adjournment sine die of that convention. So a class of business composed of several items or subjects cannot be postponed as a group. For example, that would be, say, several different reports of officers and so on. It cannot be postponed as a group. But if the assembly wanted to postpone each report individually, each report can be postponed separately. So there's some other limits on postponement. Matters that the bylaws require to be attended to at a special session cannot be postponed to another session. So like one of the common things is the election of officers. So if the bylaws specify a certain meeting or session at which the officers need to be elected, then it cannot be postponed to another session. So if it could be postponed to an adjourned meeting after adopting the motion to fix the time to which to adjourn, this is actually a continuation of the same meeting, and we'll discuss that a little bit more too as far as having an adjourned meeting, which actually can be quite an advantage, particularly if there is a topic that needs to be further discussed. So if this allows much more time to actually go into depth as to what will happen with this motion. So a postponed question then becomes an order of the day for the session, day, meeting, or hour for which it is postponed. So moving on to lay on the table, it enables the assembly to lay the pending question aside when something else needs to be addressed. There is no set time for taking up the matter again, but there are set time limits. So it can be taken from the table during the same session or next regular business session if held before a quarterly time interval has elapsed or until the end of the next regular session. So if the motion to lay on the table is not taken up, then during those timeframes, then otherwise the question dies. To really proceed with continuing with the business, you have to take it from the table. It isn't just the first part of the motion. So the question then remains on the table until it can be taken from the table during the same session, or if the next regular business will be held before a quarterly time limit has elapsed, or until the end of the next regular session. And if this is not taken, if the motion is not taken from the table, then with these time limits, the question then dies. So what is the status of a question when taken from the table? So everything adhering to it is exactly as it was when it was laid on the table. If a motion to postpone were adhering to the motion then postpone would be the first thing that would be taken up when it was taken from the table, when the discussion was started. If taken up the same day it was laid on the table, members who had exhausted the right to debate cannot speak on the question again, which I think is kind of interesting. Whereas if the motion is taken from the table on a different day, then members still have a right to debate the question. So moving on to fix the time to which to adjourn, or fix the time for an adjourned meeting. So it must be set for a time before the next regular meeting, should include the place if the assembly has no fixed place for meetings, which most assemblies do have a fixed place where they go on a regular basis. May be scheduled to meet at the call of the chair. And so this is a big advantage. So rather than having to decide to fix the time to which to adjourn, it can be included at the call of the chair, so that then the chair can make a determination as to when the adjourned meeting will occur. And it is a continuation of the session at which the motion is adopted. And interestingly enough, there is reading of the minutes at the beginning of the adjourned meeting. And these are the minutes that come from the meeting that created the adjourned meeting. So business then is taken up from the point at which the previous meeting was adjourned. So fix the time to which to adjourn. It does not require notice, but it's certainly a whole lot better if notice can be given so that people know exactly when. Has no direct effect on when the present meeting will adjourn, as you well know. So the motion to adjourn the current meeting is a totally different motion. Different from the motion to fix the time at which to adjourn, which in the past has kind of been an issue, and which is always a main motion. So this is to fix the time to which to adjourn. And fortunately now most people refer to fix the time to which to adjourn, and then adjourn is adjourn. May be introduced as a main motion or a privilege motion. And the effect of this motion is to establish an adjourned meeting. So we're now looking at reconsider. So reconsidering a vote is to correct a hasty or erroneous action or take into account added information since the vote, and has the effect of suspending any action. There's no specific change in a decision, but that the original question be reopened. It's nice, particularly if there has been more information to reopen the question, because the decision at that point in time might actually be different than it was at the original time it was proposed. And Al, you gave us all this complicated stuff on reconsider. So this is really simple stuff on reconsider at this point. If reconsider is adopted, the question is in the exact position it was at the moment before it was adopted originally. So we're going to go into just the order of business, because obviously the motions that we've discussed then affect the order of business and what is involved in our order of business. So the first thing, as you all well know, is reading and approval of the minutes. Then we have reports of the officers, board, and standing committees. Then reports of special committees, special orders, then unfinished business and general orders and new business. So that's the usual order of business. So special orders includes the orders of the day. So unfinished special orders not disposed of at a previous meeting are considered to be part of special orders. Items of business made special orders for the present meeting, but not set for a specific hour, are special orders. When the order comes up, the chair announces it as pending. such as at the last meeting, the motion to buy a computer was postponed to this meeting and made a special order. So that would be an example of what the chair would say. Special orders that have been set for a particular hour are taken up when that hour arrives. So unfinished business and general orders, questions that have come over from the previous meeting as a result of having adjourned without completing its order of business and without scheduling an adjourned meeting would fall in this category. And a general order is any question by postponement, and we talked about postponement, which has been made an order of the day without being a special order. So unfinished business and general orders, question pending when the previous meeting was adjourned, questions at the previous meeting where there was unfinished business, questions by postponement set as general orders for the previous meeting or a particular hour but were not reached before it adjourned, and general orders postponed to the present meeting or made a general order taken in the order in which they were made. So a general order is taken up for a fixed hour if no other business is pending, there are no special order that could interfere with the general order, no motion to reconsider may be moved or call up that could interfere with a general order, the category of general orders in the prescribed order of business has been reached or passed, and all general orders that were made before this order was made have been disposed of, except obviously if those that have been set for a time that has not yet arrived, then those would still come up under their general orders at the time that had been specified. So interestingly, orders of the day, the most common instances of orders of the day set for particular hours seem to be conventions when there are many activities going on. The delegates need to know a specific hour that an issue is going to be addressed. So this really becomes obviously an issue for the delegates, particularly where they're off, if there are subcommittees or other things that are going on. And so they need to know a specific hour. And so with that, it's very important to have a specific time and hour. One of the things we're not going to discuss is when you have a order set for a specific time and then you're discussing that order and then another order comes up for a specific time, and then what do you do with all of that? That's a little too complicated for today, so we're not going to discuss that. In case somebody has a
And
question
Marilyn,
about it.
if I can jump in,
Sure, please do.
and it never really happens in real life.
Okay. That's good to know, because it becomes really, really time consuming and confusing is to figure out. So now
Yeah,
you're talking of a special order and now
Yeah.
you're discussing it, and then another order comes up and it actually was supposed to be it takes precedence because it was actually ordered before that order was, and it
yeah,
just
you need a flow chart to be able to
yeah.
figure it out.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Good. Yeah. Right. Okay. Well, I'm glad to know that in reality it doesn't really happen. But I've certainly heard several meetings and parliamentarians talk about what you do and what happens, and it's very, very confusing. But it's nice to know that in reality we don't really have to worry about that too much. Thank you, Al. So in summary, so business can go over from an earlier session to a later one by being postponed and set as a general or special order, then being laid on the table and not being taken from the table before that session adjourns, going over to a later session as unfinished business, can be subject of a motion to reconsider that is not disposed of at an earlier session, and being referred to a committee. Okay, so that's what I have for this. And any questions are going to be answered by Al, like I said in the beginning. Thank you, Al.
well, I do want to make a clarification, and
Yes.
admittedly, Marilyn, I had to go look this one up.
Okay.
Early in your presentation, you said that like an officer election could not be postponed.
Right.
And,
It can be.
and I just want to clarify, and I'm going to read from the book, so I apologize, but it says
No, that's fine. I'm glad to have it.
a matter that the bylaws require to be attended to at a specified section, such as the election of officers, cannot in advance and through a main motion be postponed to another session. So blah, 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 it goes on down. And then it says at the end, if the matter has actually been taken up during the specified session as required, it may be postponed beyond the session. So just to clarify, it can be postponed if it's taken up. And my personal experience with this was a group had in their bylaws, it said the election has to occur at the March meeting. And they just simply didn't do it. And so then the president, trying to remain in office for life, said, well, we can't do it again. We can't do it till the March meeting of next year, right? Because it says in the bylaws it has to be in
Right.
March.
Okay.
So technically that one was postponed, and eventually we did have the election. They had to call a special meeting to do it. But so I'm just want to make sure that everybody understands that it could be postponed, but it's not a good idea. It recommends against it, but it can be. So
Okay. So in that situation, then what did they do? Did they go ahead and
they
and have
hired
the election?
a parliamentarian to come in and fix it. So no, but
Okay. And what did the parliamentarian do?
I came in and presided at the meeting and made the ruling that they still had to have an election. The body still had the right to have an election.
Okay, so they just went ahead and proceeded with their election at that point in
Right.
time. Okay.
To the overwhelming objection of the current chair and her attorney.
Oh, and her attorney. Okay, so what did the
But
attorney have to say about that? What was his?
her, it was a her, but
Her. Oh,
she was a member as well. And they lost 17-2.
oh, okay.
I let them appeal the decision, even though I probably shouldn't have, So they went through the whole thing. They suspended her right to preside at the meeting. They did the whole, adversarial chair thing, and installed me as a professional presider, and we went from there. So all quite well scripted, I might add.
Okay, all right.
Is that script available in like 3 bound volumes that we can get for $14.95?
Yeah, $1,495. You're correct. You can have it.
So how did you set that up then? I'm assuming that you must have done this obviously before the meeting, or you were made aware of the situation. Is that kind of how?
No, I was hired by the minority group.
Oh, okay, all right.
Well, they weren't the minority. They just weren't the chair.
Oh, okay.
The chair's opposition hired you to do the right thing in their view.
Correct. To do the will of the body, if you will,
Yeah.
Right, which was really not the minority.
It was not the minority.
Not the minority group. Okay, it was actually probably the majority in this particular instance. Okay, all right.
So I have a question. How did you become installed?
They made a motion to suspend the rules and remove the chair, to suspend the rules that require that the chair preside for the meeting, and in the same motion, install me as a professional neutral presider. And that passed, 17-2.
And they actually called you that name?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, they called me Mr. Chair once I assumed it, but
Right, but I mean original.
yeah, they called me that name because I had scripted it for them.
Oh, gotcha.
Remember the $1,300 script that he has?
Yeah.
$14.95. Thank you.
1490. Oh, sorry, 1400. Okay.
And we were there for less than an hour.
Interesting.
Yeah. Wow.
Guess
Marilyn,
what?
I'd like to.
You didn't get reelected.
Yeah, imagine
Yeah.
that.
Interestingly enough.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
I'd like to
Ray?
make another. It's perhaps not an official addition to what you've said, but I have had this happen with my HOA meetings before, where, yeah, oh my God, look at the time. We've been going at this for however long, and there's some other thing that we've been discussing, and we just can't make a decision tonight. There's make an adjourned meeting, but my issue has always been with an adjourned meeting is that we do sort of pick it up where it left off, and then you can continue the rest of the meeting, not just that topic, but other topics. And well, I want to focus on the one thing that we didn't get done. And so what I basically said during the meeting, well, when this meeting's adjourned, I'm going to call a special meeting, and then we'll have a special meeting in a couple of weeks with just that topic as the announced in the call of the meeting. And that way, when other people say, well, I wanted to talk about this and I want to talk about that, no, we're going to focus on what I think is the most important piece, and I'm going to call that meeting. And by God, that's what we're going to talk about and resolve it. And I've probably had to do that now 3 times in the last 3 years.
The difference there, Ray, is the notice requirement. That's really
Yes.
the only difference in what you're doing. So
Right. And the fact we've got a small board, and the reality is if they're all there, and I say, yeah, we're going to have a special meeting next Saturday in the park. That I've done that once before too. So but when people just won't stick to the topic at hand and get things done, in my view, it's always been easier to give notice, make a special meeting. I have to explain to them in the call of the meeting, these are the only topics that we can discuss. And then if someone says, oh, by the way, is it, no, I'm sorry, but that's out of order for the special meeting.
Well, and does it make it easier in AIPSC, which I know I'll always go there, but instead of calling it an adjourned meeting, we call it a continued meeting.
Yeah.
And that's so much easier to understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. The terminology I like better over there, but yeah. And the reality is I call it a continued meeting because when I talk about it to our group, I don't even call it an adjourned meeting because they don't understand.